Now, an interesting thing about price elasticity and demand curves is that even for a demand curve which is linear, meaning it has the same slope, so the change in price for a given change in quantity is the same anywhere on the demand curve, the price elasticity changes. Now, why is this the case? Well, if we look at this section of the demand curve up here, where it's elastic, we can see that a change in price is going to be a relatively small percentage change because the prices are so high. And a change in quantity is going to be a relatively large percentage change. So if we remember what the formula for elasticity is, it's the percent change in quantity divided by the percent change in price. A large percent change in quantity relative to percent change in price is elastic. And as we've learned, on the elastic part of a demand curve, as the quantity goes up, so does total revenue. So anywhere on this part of the demand curve, total revenue is going to rise because the price is going to change a little bit and it's going to increase quantity a lot. Right? So if you dropped your price a small percentage change, the percentage change in quantity is going to increase more. So total revenue is going to rise. Down on the inelastic portion of the demand curve, changes in quantity in percentage terms are relatively small compared to changes in prices on the inelastic portion of the demand curve. So anywhere on the inelastic portion of the demand curve, a decrease in price, which increases quantity demanded, is going to decrease total revenue. So we can see total revenue on a linear demand curve reaches a maximum where the demand curve is unit elastic. Now let's look at some examples. Suppose we look at the price elasticity along a linear demand curve, and we're going to look at the same percentage change, the same dollar change in price and the same unit change in quantity everywhere on this demand curve. So if we look at our demand curve, and it's a linear demand curve, and we look at the same unit change in price and quantity between two different points, several places on the demand curve, we can look at what our elasticity of demand turns out to be. Suppose we're on the elastic portion of the demand curve and the price goes down by $2 and the quantity goes up by $1, but we're in this section of the demand curve. So a $2 change in the price is a relatively small percentage change because the initial price is very high. And in this section of the demand curve, prices are very high. So a $2 reduction is a relatively small percentage change. Now, when we look at the demand curve in this portion, quantities are relatively small. So a 1 unit increase in quantity is a relatively large percentage change. So we have a large change in quantity divided by a small change in price in percentage terms. That gives us an elastic demand curve. Now, if we look at the same quantitative changes in this portion of the demand curve down here, where we've got a $2 reduction from one point to another and a 1 unit increase from one point to another, we can see the percentage changes are very different on this section than they are in this section. That $2 reduction is a decrease in $2 from an initial price which was much lower. So the same reduction is a much larger reduction in percentage terms when we start out down here. Now we look at quantity, we have the same increase of 1 unit. However, it's an increase of 1 unit from a much larger initial quantity, so the percentage change is much smaller. And when we look at elasticity, we get a much smaller elasticity, and it's an inelastic portion of the demand curve.